Well, hello there, my fellow rushers. How are you doing today? King Rex here. And today, we're not having a challenge video, no. For today, we're having something more interesting. I decided to make a tier list on every tower and tactic in Junk World. If you don't know what Junk World is, it's basically a game that was created by Ironhide, and it's pretty cool. I had the opportunity to play it, and it is wonderful. I've beaten the game already. I have every level is 3-starred. I have every tactic unlocked, and most of them are to pretty high level. And yeah, I feel pretty comfortable at making a tier list on them. And yeah, if you have the game, then good. If you don't, well, you're gonna get it eventually. It's still at a soft launch, so there's probably gonna be more towers and tactics added when the game fully releases. But for now, we have these guys to work with, and I'll be ranking them. Now, keep in mind that the majority of them are gonna be ranked based on my opinion, so yeah. If you may disagree or agree with some of my options, which, is completely understandable. If you have the game, then comment down below what you think. So, let's kick it off, starting off with the Machine Gunner. Holy crap, this guy is straight up wonderful. Fast attack rate, good damage, reasonable range, and very strong ultimate ability that recharges at a pretty decent rate. And it can hit flying enemies. Like, he's good for virtually everything. Flying enemies, covered. Small hordes of low tier enemies, covered. Even single target enemies, he's not too bad against them if you use his ultimate ability. Straight up into the S tier. Great tower, man. Love this guy. Love him to death. Anyway, Mortar, another great S tier tower. First, for multiple reasons. First things first, he has a very, very good area damage. Sure, his attack rate is slow, but he has so much range that it doesn't really matter. And the thing is that his damage is pretty high, and his ultimate is just great. Like, you can just launch this. He launches this explosives that affects a gigantic AoE, and it destroys most enemies with this explosion. It is wonderful. Sure, he cannot hit flying enemies directly, but if a flying enemy is close to a ground enemy that he's targeting, he can hit him with a blast. So he's potentially useful for, flying support, but not really. But overall, I would say this tower is great. Like, especially in the second area where you have to fight the, what were they called? Order formations or order footmen, whatever they're called. This thing shreds them. It is by far their best counter. Really good tower. Sniper though, ooh, this guy or girl, I suppose, is kind of questionable. She's supposed to be like the tower that's good for single target enemies, and she kind of is, but there's a couple issues with that. One of them is that this game has no armor or magic resistance, so virtually any tower can do the same amount of damage. So yeah, that's a pretty big negative. The other negative is that her damage is very inconsistent. There's 2.5 times the difference between her lowest and highest end on her damage range. And because of that, she's very unreliable, and she also has slow attack rate. The ultimate ability is good though. You can insta-kill a single enemy pretty much anywhere on the screen almost. But I just don't like her. Sorry ma'am, you're going into the D tier. She still has some purposes though, but I barely use this tower, if at all. Moving on to the Underground Warriors. Now these guys are pretty cool. I know that Vuduk despises barracks in this game, but they are actually very good. Now sure, the issue is that they spawn in and you can rally them. They just spawn in and they walk around the path. But if you form a nice choke point, they can help out. And the thing is that their stats are pretty decent. They can tank for a reasonable amount of time, and they have a good respawn rate. And the ultimate ability just summons a pretty beefy guy. He has like twice the amount of HP and a lot of damage. So he is pretty useful. I would say this tower is kind of situational though, because in Junk World it's kind of hard to form choke points. But on the levels where you can form choke points, this guy is definitely gonna help out to hold it off for quite a bit. So I'm gonna put him in C, just because there's sometimes he's useful, sometimes he's not. He's kind of in the middle, He's useful in sometimes, but others he's not required at all. So because of that, he's going into the C tier. Third tier, oh my godness, my love, my life, S tier, pretty good, man. Imagine the machine gunner with high damage. That's what this guy is. Now there are a couple issues with him, but still, the thing is that he has high damage and good attack rate, but he has short range and he cannot block enemies. However, enemies cannot attack him. He's basically just there as an additional damage. You can just put him anywhere on the map and he's gonna do a good amount of damage. He's virtually useful for everything due to the attack speed. Flying enemies, hordes of enemies, tough enemies, he's gonna do a good amount of damage to them. Now sure, he has limited ammo, meaning that he can shoot only a certain amount of time, but by the time he ends up, unleashing all of his load, you're gonna have another one of them charged up, and you can have up to 3 of them on the map, so you can preset them in case you want to. Pretty good one. I love this tactic. Moving on to the keg, explosive keg, whatever. This thing is basically the equivalent of a rain of fire. So because of that, it's going to the S tier. It is a great one. Like, it has only 20 seconds cooldown, which is really not that bad in comparison to the others' tactics. And the thing is that it's basically, it's great, man. There's no really need to explain myself here. It's an explosive that has big AoE, deals heavy damage, can hit every enemy. Great. Just great. Moving on to Mad Mark, though. As stupid as it may seem, I'm gonna put him also in S tier. I know, kind of weird. A lot of towers are already into the S tier, but this guy is pretty good. He's the equivalent of a good tactic. He has good durability, decent damage. He has both melee and range combat capabilities, good movement speed, and he also has this little doggo that helps him out to block enemies. So yeah, he is a pretty solid tactic to use. You can never go wrong with Mad Mark. Moving on to the Misfits, though. Now, this one is a little bit controversial, but this is my opinion. I'm gonna put them in S tier. Now, their stats are not great, I'll admit it. Their health is not as much. It's kind of like they're basically like underground warriors, but a little bit worse. However, because of how many times they can save you, they're so useful, man. They're basically like the reinforcements of the game. You kind of need them. Like, you can block so many enemies with them, especially an enemy that's about to leak. They can block him for a while until you get another tactic recharged, or until you annihilate them with your tower. They're useful. They can come in clutch so many times, and because of how versatile they are, I just can't put them any lower than S. They're so useful, man. You can never go wrong with these guys. Moving on to the fire starter or the fire trucker. This guy is kind of a questionable tower. He's only meant to be good for low tier enemies, but on the other hand, he's actually not too bad against the mid tier enemies too. He's kind of like the crowd control tower. If you have a bunch of hordes of enemies, he can hit a lot of them at once, do some damage over time. The ultimate ability is kind of interesting. It's basically like a bigger explosion that deals double his base damage. I think at my level that he is right now, he deals 15 damage, so the explosion deals 30 damage. And that's not bad, but against tough enemies, he really doesn't do much. And he can also hit flying enemies on top of that. So, because of all these things, I'm gonna put him in B. He's still a useful tower, but he's not my personal favorite per se. Moving on to the Lumberjack. Now, a lot of people who play this game like this guy, and I can see why. He's basically like kind of like a goblin rank in a way. You know the goblin ranks from Kingdom Rush Vengeance? He's basically the equivalent of those. However, his attack is homing. The issue is that he can only hit 2 enemies with it. He cannot hit more than that, but because of his somewhat of a fast attack rate, I won't say it's fast. It's more about average in comparison to the other towers. But I think he's decent. His ultimate ability is good, but it only is good if you have a choke point, because you need to keep enemies into his ability. Basically, he just summons this big soul blade that spins around and deals a lot of damage, but it is stationary, and enemies can easily walk right by it. So unless you're blocking enemies, yeah, this ability is kind of useless. But because of how virtually useful he is in most situations, I'll bump him up to A tier. I originally thought about putting him in B tier, but now that I think about it, he's kind of decent, so I'm gonna put him in A. Moving on to kind of a disappointing tower. Support, the command center. F tier. He's basically the only support tower that you have, but there are a lot of issues with this guy. 1. He gives 20% damage buff at level 1 to towers in his radius, and his radius is very tiny, which is kind of a problem. And the other issue is that he equally divides the buff, so the more towers you have, the less damage bonus you're gonna receive. Which is just complete garbage. Like, why would you bother getting this guy when you can get another tower? That's theoretically, by definition, 100% extra damage, rather than 20% extra damage. And the ultimate ability is just now. It's basically like a massive airstrike that hits a lot of enemies, but the damage from the missiles is so little that it's just pathetic. Pathetic tower. Let me just slide down a little bit. Moving on to Mad Scientist. F tier, man. Sorry, bro. That's the way it is. Now, he's basically like the equivalent of a Blazing Gem. But imagine the Blazing Gem from Kingdom Rush Vengeance with like 10 times less damage. That's what this guy is. And he just doesn't do much. He sucks against hordes of enemies, and the only thing that he's supposed to be good against is basically tough enemies. However, because of how long it takes for his damage to ramp up, the enemy is probably going to exit out of his radius before he can achieve his max power, or he's not gonna kill the enemy fast enough. And usually you don't get single isolated enemies. You get usually a big enemy surrounded by low tier enemies, so you need to combine them with like a fire trucker in order for him to work. Yeah, this guy is just not great. And the ultimate ability is pretty much nothing. He just gets another laser for a for a brief moment, which doesn't do much. Pretty much an F tier. Moving on to the Polymorphing Tower. Now, I don't remember the name of this tower, but it is great. Easy S tier. Basically, it's like the insta-kill tower. Every 4 seconds, you can insta-kill an enemy and turn him into a sheep. Now, it's not technically an insta-kill, it's kind of like the Sorcerer's Polymorph ability from the original Kingdom Rush, but it is pretty strong. Basically, it reduces the movement speed of the enemy by a lot. It removes all of his special properties, and it removes his attack completely. So, as long as you have like a misfit blocking the sheep, it's basically going nowhere. It's not gonna do anything. It is a great tower. The ultimate abilities may seem a little bit underwhelming, because the chickens that it summons don't do a lot of damage, but because it is so spammable, it's actually kinda decent. However, you need to time it properly, because when he's performing his special ability, he doesn't polymorph enemies. So if you use his ultimate ability in a bad time, you may not polymorph a tough enemy that you may want to. So yeah. But anyway, this tower is great. I really like him. Moving on to the Waste Disposer. Now this guy is basically like the other form of barracks that you have, besides the underground warriors. However, he has quite a few issues. The issue is that he summons only 2 units. And these units are basically tankier, but they do less damage and their attack rate is just very bad. And they have very slow movement speed, so it's kind of hard to maneuver them around. And because of their large aggro range and slow movement speed, they can easily just waste time trying to stall an enemy that's gonna die in like another second. And yeah, I just don't really like this guy. I don't know what it is, but I don't really feel this tower. The ultimate ability is kind of interesting. It's kind of like a Furnace Blast in a way. And basically, he damages everybody in his radius and he deals small increments of damage over time. But, just meh. Like, it's not great because most enemies in Junk World move fast. And they can easily just get by this AoE. Basically, they can get out of his radius in a pretty short time. Unless you're blocking them in there consistently, which it's kind of hard to do, so yeah. I'll put them in D. He still has some uses, but for the most part, you'll be better off going for the Underground Warriors. Unless you're trying to form like a specific choke point, then he could be useful, but still, I just don't like him. Moving on to the Baron von Bomb, or whatever his name was, the Bombardier guy. Now, originally when I saw him and I unlocked him, I was like, oh my god, is this a flying hero? Is this a flying hero that tosses explosive? Is this Ice Cold 2.0? Sadly he wasn't. He is not that. He's basically like this Bombardier guy. He's flying, so he doesn't block enemies, and he cannot get targeted for some reason by ranged enemies, which I don't know what's the deal with that, but okay. And the issue with this guy is that, well, actually he has multiple issues. One of them is his cooldown to duration ratio. It is pretty messed up. He takes 22 seconds, let me just bump him up a little bit so you can see, 22 seconds to recharge, and he doesn't last for very long. I'm not quite sure what his duration is, but it's not very long. Like, you can toss in like a couple bombs before he disappears, and you can only have one of them. You cannot have multiples, which is kind of the issue. And basically the damage is okay. It's kind of like a Mortar with weaker damage but faster attack rate. But I just don't find this guy to be very useful. Like, in comparison to the other tactics, why would you go for this guy when you could just get an explosive keg and annihilate a horde of enemies in an instant? With this guy, you need to group up the enemies, which is pretty hard to do. So yeah, man, I'm sorry, bro. You're cool. I love your design. I love your voice lines, but D tier, man. Just straight up outclassed by a lot of other tactics. And speaking of other tactics, look at that. We have the mines. The mines are kind of interesting. They're good in a way. They have a pretty short cooldown, 15 seconds for an explosive. That's by far the shortest out of any area damage dealing tactics. But the issue is that each mine can hit only one subblade at a time, so you can't really use them to stack up against one enemy. And they have a pretty tiny AoE. Even though they're supposed to do area damage, the AoE size is pretty small. So yeah, I don't really like the mines, but they are kind of useful. They're useful from time to time, but I don't know. The guy is just the best, man. These guys, even though you can spam them and they last for a very long time, I suppose they are kind of good because you can kind of set up traps with them. You can just put them like behind your choke point or around the exit in case of an enemy leaking. They can save your butt like that. So, because they can come in glitch sometimes, and you can do some interesting strategies with them, I'm gonna bump them up to A tier. The mice are not my personal favorite thing per se, but I still find myself using them from time to time, just like the Lumberjack. Moving on to the Harpooners. These girls, they are kind of bad. Now, I know a lot of people are gonna hate me for it, because how dare I insult these guys? They're basically like your reinforcements, but with long-range attacks. Well, yeah, that's cool. But the issue is that, one, their durability is non-existent. They can pretty much die in like 1 or 2 shots, which is basically nothing. And they have 15 seconds cooldown, so in comparison to the Misfits, they're virtually worst. Even though their ranged attack is supposed to save them, it is very, very inconsistent. Like, they have 6 times the differences between their lowest DPS and their highest DPS. So because of that, I can't quite put them as high as I want them to. They could be useful though, but just meh, B tier. They're still okay, but I don't like them. I don't like them because of their inconsistency. Sometimes they're gonna do great, sometimes they're gonna do worst. And because of the energy system in the game, they're kind of infuriating to use from time to time, to be honest. Moving on to the Trash Man. Now, this guy is hard to rate because I really love him. Basically, he's like the tank. He's like the tank tactic. You put him down, and he tanks a lot of damage. However, he doesn't attack. He just stays there, and he absorbs damage. But he has a lot of health. I think at level 7, which is the level that I have him right now, he has over 400 HP, which in this game is a lot. And he can withstand a crap ton of damage. He is great. Especially if you're dealing with order formations or ranged enemies, he can stall them for quite a while. Now, I want to put him in S tier, but there are quite a few enemies that can counter him, like Gator Riders, for example, or enemies that do straight up very high damage. They can chop through him in a few seconds. So yeah, I'm gonna put him in A. But I want to put him in S, but because, as I said, because there are quite a few enemies that can counter him, like fast-moving enemies or enemies that cannot be blocked, or Gator Riders. Because the Gator Rider is the only enemy that can insta-kill. I mean, sure, you can micro him around, but it's kind of hard to micro in this game, to be honest. So yeah, into the A tier you go. And we're finishing off with an atrocious tactic, the Healer. F tier, just no. Why would you even use this guy? He's not useful overall. Like, his main purpose is to heal your tactics. But the thing is that his healing isn't good enough. Like, even at a high level, mine is at, I think, level 5 at the moment, he heals only 33 HP per second, which sounds like a good amount. But when you have a bunch of ranged enemies attacking your tactics, or if you're having like an enemy that possesses an insta-kill ability, or someone that has very high damage in general, they can easily bypass the regeneration that this guy provides. And why would you use him? Like, you can use the turret tier, you can use Mad Mark, you can use anything else, but if you use this guy, then you're probably doing something very weird. And I don't know what to think of you, man. That's just weird. I don't like this guy, let's just say that. Let's leave it at that. And so, that's gonna do it for the tier list, guys. These are all the towers and tactics in Junk World, based on my opinion. Now, if you have the game, comment down below what you think. Do you enjoy it? Do you like it? What you agree and disagree on? And where would you put the tactics and towers based on your opinion? I would love to hear that. Now, I know that this game is not available for everybody at the moment because it's at a soft launch, but trust me, soon I think this game is gonna release worldwide and everyone can have a blast with it. Even though a lot of people say that this game is too hard, it's actually kind of enjoyable once you get the right levels. Once you learn what the best towers are, it gets pretty easy. And yeah, guys, well, with that out of the way, that's gonna do it for the video. Thank you everybody so much for watching. I appreciate you for sticking around to the end. Subscribe if you want to see more of this content in the future. And while you're at it, drop a like on the video. It means a lot to me. And by the way, comment down below if would you like to see some Junk World content coming out of my channel. Would you like to see that? Because I'm kind of wanting to do it. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Until it comes, that was King Rexy, over and out.